ready to dive into some of the most disturbing Japanese films you've probably never heard of. I promise there'll be something that will surprise you here. I made this disturbing Japanese iceberg, and today we're going to go through it in order of most popular to obscure. And I've done this by going through popularity rankings on IMDb. That's how I've ordered it. Also, this iceberg is focused on disturbing elements that are more psychological. There's definitely violence and a lot of taboo subjects, but it's not a splatter iceberg. That is a whole other subgenre and a whole other iceberg that could be huge. So I wanted to really focus on the dark elements, the ones that are watchable. So these are all watchable films in some regard. So grab a piece of paper and a pen, because I promise there will be something that will shock you on the way down. Make sure in the comments to let me know how many you have seen. I can't wait to see. I am so sorry to do this to you so soon. Literally the first film out of the gate, but Grave of Fireflies will always be the bleakest Japanese film in my book. And that's why it's at the top, because it's popular. But this makes sense because it's a highly effective film that has a cultural impact that's undeniable. The story follows two young siblings during the final days of World War II. After an American firebomb separates them from their parents, they're left to rely completely on one another as they fight to survive, entering starvation. And the contrast is what cuts the deepest. On the surface, it looks like a typical Studio Ghibli coming of age. It's got glowing fireflies, soft rivers, beautifully detailed animation, but the reality is cruel. Farmers turn them away, neighbors pretend not to see them, and the ration system all but signs their death certificate. What I find fascinating in the presentation of this is that Studio Ghibli is known for a focus on food and romanticizing food as a cozy, warm comfort. And in this film, it's the complete opposite. There's a whole analysis that could be done about that alone. The film is a slow, desperate journey that isn't just about war, it's about indifference. It's about everyone who turned their head while children starved under the same sky. It's one of the saddest films you'll ever see, and being based on historical reality that feels more relevant than ever makes it one of the hardest to watch. As we go further down the iceberg of disturbing cinema, we'll run into plenty of taboo, violent, and sexual content, but nothing hits as hard as reality and suffering laid bare. Well, there's actually one other film that is quite comparable to this movie, but it's in a live action format, and that comes much later, but I'll let you know. It actually took me years to finally watch this film because I was afraid of what I would find, and I was completely right. It has never left my mind, and I can't believe that this film is under 90 minutes because it plays out like an epic. It's truly a beautiful film that will break your heart into a million pieces. Akira is a cult classic from 1988, and it was well ahead of its time. It's a landmark Japanese animated cyberpunk film set in a dystopian 2019 Neo-Tokyo, following corruption and gang violence. The story follows biker gang leader Kaneda and his childhood friend Tetsuo, whose sudden acquisition of uncontrollable psychic powers sparks chaos and mutation, pushing him towards a horrifying physical and mental transformation. The film's disturbing elements include graphic violence, body horror, and psychological consequences of power and trauma. And this is all amplified by the surreal, nightmarish visuals, and of course, apocalyptic imagery. The movie helped define Japanese cyberpunk, and it opened a lot of audiences worldwide to adult-oriented anime. Its detailed and violent depiction of morphing and changing is able to push boundaries due to the obvious animated format. But still, the emotional consequences hit extremely hard. It's able to do body horror without splatter, and it also includes the disturbing psychological side. This is really a must-watch for all film fans. Please trust me, if you're not into anime, this is still a glorious movie. Did you know Battle Royale was this popular? It is a brutal dystopian thriller that drops junior high students into a government-mandated death game, waking up in a remote island with rations, weapons, and explosive collars that punish disobedience. The teens are forced to fight each other to the last survivor, but it's the dynamics between the children that keep it from being pure splatter. It's about shifting alliances, sudden betrayal, and the horrifying reality of watching classmates, well, die. It's such an insanely intense film, and it doesn't shy away from its disturbing content. It has graphic violence, self-harm, and the moral collapse of ordinary kids make it a relentless, horrifying watch. But it also has an undercurrent, an intent outside of exploitation. It shows evil cycling abuse from its own trauma, and it comments on the mistrust of authority, framing the game as a metaphor for societal control, generational tension, and pressures placed on the youth. Battle Royale sparked international national outrage on its release, and it was banned and restricted in multiple countries. It wasn't until 2010 that it was released officially in the US. But by then, the Barbra Streisand effect had helped it garner a cult following. And this expanded the franchise into multiple films, animes, and video games. It's known as one of the franchises that wasn't scared to be blatant or bold with its metaphors, and of course, its graphic content. At its core, Battle Royale is a shocking film about authority, survival, and the loss of innocence. Perfect Blue is one of my favorites. It's a harrowing psychological thriller that delves into identity, obsession, and the destructive pressures of fame. If you're a fan of Black Swan and you haven't seen this one, it will be right up your alley, I promise. Give it a watch. This story follows a former J-pop idol who leaves her music career to pursue acting, only to be stalked by a creepy, obsessive fan and confronted by things that aren't as they seem as her sense of reality and self begins to implode. But that's not all. Her psychological downfall is heightened by a series of gruesome murders that all seem to be connected to her acting. The film is relentlessly intense, combining stylized animation with deep, disturbing themes of voyeurism, celebrity obsession, and of course, the loss of self-identity. It's a push and pull between who she wants to be, who she's seen as, and how the outside world sees her. And again, because it's anime, there are no limits. Here, fantasy and reality intertwine, leaving both the main character and the audience questioning what's real. And there's so many amazing deep dives on this one. Beyond the thrills, the film critiques the exploitive nature of pop culture and the psychological toil of objectification, while exploring themes of trauma, manipulation, and survival. It's a really stunning movie with a focus on its psychological disturbing elements. But of course, there's murder too, you know, just to balance it out. And Paprika, even though it gets talked about a little bit less, is technically just as popular. It's by the same director as Perfect Blue, and like Perfect Blue, it's a psychological nightmare wrapped in a dazzling, mind-bending anime. If you haven't seen this one and you like Perfect Blue, you're gonna love me for this recommendation. Paprika dives into the deep and fragile boundary between dreams and reality. The story follows a psychiatrist who secretly enters her patient's dreams through her alter ego, Paprika, a bold, whimsical dream detective. But when a dream device is stolen that allows anyone's dreams to be accessed, chaos erupts, spilling the dream world into reality, unleashing surreal nightmares that blur the perception of identity and control. The animation transforms the city into a shifting landscape of subconscious fears and desires. With this insane parade of nightmares, just look at it, it's glorious, and it serves as a haunting, symbolic centerpiece. It's creepy because of its childlike aesthetic. The film is really hypnotic, even though it's a little bit confusing as it's happening. It blends fantastical visuals with psychological tension, while the music lingers long after the credits roll. I promise this will get stuck in your head. Paprika is a playful, terrifying film that doesn't just show dreams, but immerses you in them. Fun fact, this film is also said to have inspired the movie Inception. It leaves you questioning reality and unsettled in the process, but I will warn you, it does demand multiple viewings to really break down all of the layers. But it's well worth the unsettling journey. I'm sure a lot of you have seen Audition. This slow-burning, utterly terrifying Japanese horror starts as a quiet drama and ends with one of the most infamous finales in disturbing cinema. The premise is about a widower who stages a fake audition to try and find a new wife and becomes entranced by a mysterious woman who's seemingly meek and innocent, but her calm, beautiful exterior hides something far darker. This is our first Miike Takashi film on this list, and let me tell you, there's gonna be a lot. And in this, his most popular disturbing film, he lulls the audience into a sense of normalcy with gentle, almost romantic moments, only to shatter this illusion with shocking, detailed violence. Warning, do not eat while you watch this film. Thank me later. The final sequence is unforgettable, and it has influenced horror filmmakers worldwide. The film can be experienced as a pure horror story, but it also explores the themes of misogyny, obsession, and the consequences of desire. Ai Shina, I hope I pronounced that right, her chilling performance in this film is unmatched. Audition is a masterclass in tension, dread, and the thin line between love and terror. The film is horrifying and impossible to forget. This is not first date material, or if you're like me, maybe it is. And now we're at tier 2. Ichi the Killer is Miike Takashi at his most unguarded. It's a grotesque, hyper-violent dive into the dark heart of underworld crime. The film is about Ichi, a timid, socially awkward man whose psychological trauma and sexual repression manipulate him into a violent killer. And of course, opposing him is a sadomasochistic enforcer obsessed with pain and control. The story is a relentless cycle of murder, revenge, and perverse obsession, with Ichi's actions triggering a chain of grotesque and shocking violence that spares no one. Okay, this one does lightly touch on the splatter, the Japanese splatter subgenre, but it does so as a commentary on creating the quote-unquote monster. Its intent is backed up by its amplified, exaggerated bloodshed. The film has insane body horror and moments of darkly comedic absurdity, forcing the audience to confront both the spectacle of cruelty and the psychological torment behind it. The graphic scenes in this film are a lot. You've got mutilation, sexual violence. It's infamous worldwide with censorship battles in multiple countries. But beneath the shock value, Ichi the Killer is a story about power, violence, and manipulation. It's a chaotic, merciless, and unforgettable ride. Honestly, it's a little exhausting at times, but utterly shocking and well worth its cult status. Ju-on is a film I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And today we're talking about the 2000 Ju-on, Ju-on the Curse. The story is simple, but it's relentlessly terrifying. A man is convinced that his wife is cheating and brutally ends his entire family, including their cat. And this violence spreads like a virus. You won't find Ringu on this list, but Ju-on has some intense, disturbing elements that go beyond the standard of horror. Although obviously it's hard to draw strict boundaries. The terror echoes beyond the simple scares with strong themes of brutal domestic violence, harm against children, and animals. This first film, Ju-on the Curse, was a direct-to-video release shot in just 9 days on a tiny budget. But the minimalist approach was insanely effective, launching a huge ongoing franchise. Combined with an idea that the curse can never be escaped, it stands out in Japanese horror as a deeply disturbing tip, or maybe not tip, but start of an iceberg. Confessions is a 2010 psychological thriller adapted from the novel of the same name. The film follows a junior high school teacher whose infant daughter is found dead under mysterious circumstances. Driven by revenge, she then starts a chilling psychological game with her students, manipulating them into revealing the truth. As the title suggests, confessions. The story shifts between the teacher and the students' perspectives, exposing a tangled web of guilt, abuse, and trauma. The film depicts extreme psychological manipulation by the teacher, crossing boundaries with threats and actions that are both so shocking and unsettling, moments you can't even imagine, even in fiction. But the film is also a study of the human psyche, exploring revenge, abuse, neglect, and the ripple effects of trauma on everyone involved. The film was a major success in Japan, ranking as the 7th highest grossing Japanese film of 2010. Okay, time for another heartbreaking entry, Monster from 2023. This is a Japanese psychological mystery drama told in carefully constructed sections. The story follows a mother who grows increasingly concerned when her young son begins to act strangely, prompting her to confront his teacher and the school, and it does not go well. The mystery is so precisely written that it keeps you guessing right up until the final conclusion, which is a devastating watch. The film carries an eerie tension throughout that is unsettling from the very beginning, but the eventual reveal lands like a gut punch, anchored by a startling performance by the young boy at its center. I wept when I watched this one in the cinema. It premiered at Cannes Film Festival, and it went on to win Best Screenplay. The director said in an interview that each character is in some way trapped by invisible walls. The mother by social norms, the teacher by masculinity and the school system, and the children by the world shaped and scarred by adults. He went on to say that he wanted the realization to feel hopeful, but I can't tell you I felt that way at all. For me, the film felt less hopeful and more devastating. It's not the themes and the content that make it disturbing, it's the heartbreaking essence. It has haunted me for days, weeks, and months in ways that many darker films never did. Hana-bi is a very reserved Japanese crime drama classic. It has a unique balance of brutal violence with quiet self-reflection and beauty. The movie is about a retired detective who is traumatized by an arrest gone wrong that killed his colleague and left others severely injured. Now he spends his days caring for his terminally ill wife while grappling with anger, grief, and the debts that he still owes. While he's a man of very few words, he's lingering in open spaces, and longing glares carry the story as he plans out what he will do to try and right what he can with his time left. But this calm, calculated act of defiance has intense moments of violence. The film's stunning landscapes, surreal, pointillist paintings, and meticulous editing create a quiet, bleak film about mortality, grief, and the impossibility of changing the past. It's a film about not being able to move on from something so devastating, if you will. he's still at the restaurant. It's violent but quiet in moments, and its dramatic ending is what sticks with you. It's depressing yet beautiful. Nobody Knows is a horrific story inspired by the tragic real-life Sugamo child abandonment case. The film follows 4 siblings aged between 5 and 12 who are left to survive on their own after their mother abandons them in a small Tokyo apartment. With only each other, the children navigate hunger and isolation. The story is devastating, but it mainly focuses on the eldest, who resumes the impossible role of caregiver, shielding his siblings from the harsh reality of their abandonment. But the film also captures the children's resilience and small joys, which somehow makes it almost more heartbreaking, because in these moments you realize how much innocence is lost. The film is utterly tragic, and the ending is something I think about often. The director hired untrained actors to create the realistic performances that make this story feel so raw and painfully authentic. The way that these children interact during abuse is so vulnerable and at times unbearable. I'm letting you know that this one is utterly devastating, and as a viewer, you're going to feel completely helpless for the entire runtime. Okay, let's step away from the devastation for just 1 second, because Cure is a slow burn that is well regarded for its unique, eerie atmosphere that will get under your skin. If you're a horror fan, this one is for you. And it's deceptively simple. It's about a series of murders with no apparent motive, committed by people who can't remember why they did it. Now, we follow a detective who is investigating the only common thread, a mysterious man. This film is disturbing because of its clinical way it exposes evil. The movie is cold, direct, and utterly hypnotic. It's got long, quiet shots, empty streets, and the way the characters move through the space creates such a sense of dread. It's a really beautifully disconnected movie, and probes into the human mind and how easy we can be broken, manipulated, or consumed by forces beyond our understanding. The movie is included among Letterboxd's top 250 horror films. It's a staple for all horror fans and fans of dark cinema who are looking for an unsettling, all-consuming nightmare. Tier 3, let's go! Tetsuo the Iron is a pure, chaotic body horror that feels incredibly overstimulating, so strap in because this one is brutal. The story is minimal and known for not having a very conventional narrative, but the main takeaway is about a businessman who accidentally hits a man who is already possessed by a metallic mutation, and now his transformation begins. You know, just that old story about flesh and metal that is fused together in grotesque and uncontrollable ways. The movie creates sequences that are both mesmerizing and utterly revolting. And what I was not expecting from this film is sexual scenes. It pushes a lot of boundaries. And oh my god, the sound. The film is relentless in its visuals, screeching industrial soundtrack, and jerky, frantic camera work. With a rapid montage of metallic limbs tearing through skin, the movie is a staple for disturbing Japanese film, and it uses a lot of unique body horror. You could really put it in its own subgenre. Memories is an anthology anime that blends sci-fi and horror, and honestly, it feels like it's inspired by parts of Black Mirror. Each segment uses technology and science fiction as its backdrop. It's a unique journey that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, but it was way ahead of its time. The first story is Magnetic Rose, and this is easily the standout. It's set in deep space as a salvage crew investigates a distress signal and stumbles into a crumbling opera house floating in the void. It's the most psychologically disturbing of the entries, and it is full of illusions that bend memory and reality until you can't tell which is which. This segment also touches on the Japanese criticism of Madame Butterfly, which I thought was really interesting, and it also has some really profound haunted sequences. Next up is Stink Bomb, which flips the tone completely. A lab worker accidentally takes the wrong pills, turning himself into a walking biological weapon. What starts as a dark comedy quickly becomes horrifying when you realize the grand scale of destruction that he's unknowingly causing. And the depiction of death in this one is pretty haunting, even if it's animated. And finally, we have Cannon Fodder. This is a bleak dystopian short, and the animation style of this one is very different to the other films. It's told in one single take and weaves throughout a city that is built entirely around an endless war. Here we watch kids grow up with destruction and chaos that is normalized, and on top of all of that, propaganda is rampant without ever explaining to its citizens who the enemy enemy is, or if there is one at all. The tone is deeply unsettling, and it really reminds me of When the Wind Blows. This one is really short and sharp, but it drives home a bigger message. The animation across all of these segments are stunning, and each short hits in a different way. Together they form a powerful, underrated anthology. If you haven't seen Memories, it should be at the top of your list. I think it's one of the standouts that I would recommend to most people on this iceberg. Onibaba is both horror folk and a period drama, but above all, it's a Japanese classic that went on to influence horror and cinema worldwide. On the surface, it's a story about a woman and her mother-in-law trying to survive in the mid-14th century. They commit murder and theft, but news of a loved one shifts their dynamic, drawing them into a strange love triangle with a mysterious man. But everything changes with the introduction of a demon mask, the Hanya. Initially used as a tool of control, its final act reveals the true ugliness within. The first two acts unfold like a drama, but the film ends with intense horror and a little bit of gore. The Hanya scenes are particularly unnerving, but the real disturbing element is the psychological torment and the poetic look at destructive human relationships. The struggle for power and obsession blurs the line between human cruelty and supernatural terror, leaving the audience to question whether true demons are not spirits but humans consumed by their own fate. It is truly a classic for a reason. And then of course we've got the club, S Club. I am not going to say the word because if I say it too many times in one video, it will get censored and you won't be able to even see that this video exists. I do apologize, but this does start with one of the most intense scenes, presenting 54 schoolgirls plunging onto train tracks. It's shocking and it reframes how we see this subject matter because it's shown in this film like it's never been before or since. But the intent for this film goes far beyond pure splatter. The film functions as a disturbing metaphor for the dangers of conformity, social pressure, and isolation. It critiques how media and online communication can exacerbate these issues and foster a detachment from reality. The film also confronts cultural attitudes towards the ending of one's life in Japan, a society with a long, complex history where failure, misfortune, or mental health issues are heavily stigmatized. Directed by Su1c1de, who you'll see a lot on this list, it explores this subject in a way that the viewer cannot ignore. What makes S Club particularly disturbing isn't the subject, but it's how it's normalized and how ceremonial these scenes are. The film gained international notoriety for its transgressive subject matter and gruesome presentation, developing a significant cult following. It's dark cinema pushing the boundaries, but the ironic thing about all of this is even saying the title of the film can get this video restricted, which is the very issue. Suppressing discussion prevents any meaningful change on this subject matter. But I also want to give an honorable mention to its interconnected film, Noriko's Dinner Table, which serves as a companion piece to this film, although it's a lot slower and looks at the subject of isolation and loneliness in more of a personal way, but it does have a violent conclusion. Box is a segment from the 2004 anthology 3 Extremes, which features 3 Asian horror films from different countries. This segment is the Japanese entry, of course, directed by, yes, Miike Dakashi. The film follows a woman who is haunted by recurring nightmares from her past. We dive into her strange childhood as a circus performer alongside her twin sister. At its core, it explores themes of child abuse and the struggle for self-identity, with the imagery of the box serving as both literal and symbolic confinement as she is locked inside. The story has a number of dramatic twists, but its full weight is understood in its final moments. While the segment leans into disturbing subject matter, at times it feels a little bit cliche, but Box is still a unique, clear expression of violence, trauma, and fractured identity. I recommend obviously watching all of the segments of this film, and it's a must watch for anyone who likes dark horror that's a little bit taboo in its themes. Noroi the Curse has a reputation of being one of the most unsettling found footage films ever. It even opens up with a disclaimer claiming the footage is too disturbing for public viewing. The story follows a paranormal researcher as he documents a string of strange, horrifying events tied to a mysterious residence. What makes it so effective is the way it pieces together its narrative through different forms of media. At first it feels random, but it's slowly building towards a puzzle that leads to the origins of an evil force unleashed. The investigation portion, which is my favorite, feels alarmingly realistic, which only makes the horrors it reveals more unnerving. But it truly ups the ante with its disturbing content, including animal cruelty, self-harm, and chilling rumors involving babies. It's not just creepy, it's the kind of film that actually feels cursed to watch it, as the name suggests. And it has an immense amount of details within its runtime, making it prone to many fan theories, which means it's a film that rewards or punishes multiple viewings if you're brave enough. If you're into found footage, this isn't just a recommendation, it is an essential viewing. Its atmosphere in terms of scares is unmatched, and it's the scariest disturbing film for me on this list. Visitor Q is the very definition of shocking. Miike Takashi presents one of the most disturbing family portraits ever put on screen, and it's this far up in the iceberg because it's still quite popular. It's about a home steeped in sexual abuse, violence, and perversion, and yet somehow it's framed as an erotic black comedy horror. The film follows a highly dysfunctional family already collapsing under its own weight until a mysterious stranger inserts himself into their lives, pushing their chaos to unbearable heights, structured around these provocative questions that appear as title cards. The story plunges into taboo territory with family relations with people who have passed, and of course, extreme violence. When I say disturbing, I truly mean it. The director really knows what he's doing here, holding these scenes for longer than they should play out. And if you keep repeating to yourself, this is meant to be a comedy, this is meant to be a comedy, I promise eventually they will end. Visitor Q is a bizarre experiment into horror, comedy, extremity, a film that dares to showcase the unthinkable as if it was just another slice of life. The question is, are you brave enough to sit through it? Cold Fish is directed again by Su1c1de. It's a grim, crime-based horror that is loosely based on a real-life case of a serial killer couple in Japan. And it begins deceptively ordinary, with a young girl being offered a job by an overly friendly fish shop owner. But that offer quickly spirals into brutality when the shop owner's sick hobbies are revealed. The film goes from mundane to strange quite quickly, and there's a unique sense of wrongness in the way that the film is presented. It's almost like the gift of fear. You sense it before the danger even sets in. But I mean, we should know by now from the director that we are in enemy territory, and its characters are not afraid to lean into the overdramatics. To match, the film's gore scenes are insane. The sheer amount of body fluids in this film, it's startling. It's a disturbing story that focuses on fear and desperation and how that can push people to comply with unthinkable acts. There's themes of sexual perversion and assault. This is another film again that draws out long, uncomfortable scenes, and they do this to trap the audience in the same nightmare that the protagonist is in. It almost feels like you're helpless, watching a fish trapped inside a small tank. Escape feels impossible. It's kind of exhausting, but it's a true psychological crime nightmare. Gozu is truly a rotten film, but its pull is undeniable. Directed by Miike Takashi, the film opens with one of the most insane, shocking, animal abuse scenes I've ever seen, and it's not gory at all. Just very strange. But it features a gang member who loses control, and now he's seen as a security risk, so another member of the gang is ordered to take him out. But when his target mysteriously disappears, the film shifts into something far stranger, and that's only the first 10 minutes. I'm really not giving away much. From here, reality unravels. Our main protagonist, who has found himself in a small town looking for this target, shifts from predator to the prey, and the film swiftly loses all realism. The sound design is bizarre, the cinematography is erratic, and the whole film thrives on the unexpected. Its warm yet sickly tone makes it feel timeless and otherworldly. And I was asked recently about international horror and why it's so effective on a Western audience, and I think that this film is such a good example of that. It is totally unexpected, and it does not have to follow any structures that we know the beat of from Hollywood. And that's where Gozu thrives. The name comes from the Japanese urban legend of Gozu, which is Cowhead, a cursed story that's said to terrify people to death. And this curse hangs over the film with disturbing imagery and symbolic touches throughout. It also features a lot of graphic sexual scenes unlike I've ever seen before, depicting genitalia in a surrealist manner. The film is disturbing in a completely unexpected way, and it's a good idea to avoid eating while watching this one. Although again, it's another one that's built as a comedy horror, but the disturbing elements outweigh any laughs for me. And here we are at tier 4 of the iceberg. Miike Takashi's The Happiness of the Katakuris is one of those rare disturbing films that I don't feel bad at all for saying it's enjoyable. It's an over-the-top, surreal blend of horror, comedy, and musical elements. The story follows a family running a guest house in a remote area when suddenly their guests mysteriously start to die, leading to a series of bizarre and darkly comedic events. While the film's tone is whimsical, it has a very interesting contrast or juxtaposition with its macabre themes, kind of like House from 1977, which I did cut from this iceberg because I felt it was too lighthearted. But The Happiness of the Katakuris is slightly more evil, hoping to leave the audience in a constant state of unease that makes them question why they find it pleasurable or entertaining. The way they discuss the end of life is refreshingly morbid. If you're looking for a different angle on death and murder, one that will make you sing along, well, lock in. If you're looking for pure unnerving atmosphere, Spiral is one of the most visually upsetting of Japanese dark cinema. Adapted from Ito Junji's manga, the story centers on obsession with an entire town consumed by a curse tied to the shape of spirals. The film is overflowing with bizarre, iconic imagery, mutations, grotesque compulsions, and surreal visuals that are designed to make your skin crawl. It's less about a tight, logical plot and more about pulling you into a nightmare. The narrative might feel loose, but the atmosphere and strange, elaborate set design make it an uncanny ride, one you just have to surrender to instead of trying to make sense of. The film was produced while the manga was still being written, so it breaks away from the original story and ends differently. If you want a creepy, atmospheric, disturbing visual ride instead of layered themes or complex storytelling, it's definitely worth a watch. Tag, directed by Su1c1de, is a surrealist and chaotic film that drops its protagonist into a series of increasingly violent and bizarre realities. The film opens with an iconic scene. What starts as an ordinary school day suddenly turns horrific when an unseen force interferes with a bus full of students, creating a graphic moment that just has to be seen to be believed. But this isn't a splatter film. There's a surprising amount of depth beneath. Honestly, from the opening scene, you'd have no idea what's to follow. While it throws a lot at the wall and only some sticks, it's not only a genre-bending journey, but also a mind-bending experience. It's impossible to summarize clearly, and explaining too much would spoil the grand reveal, but it's a ride worth taking if you're looking for something strange and bold. The movie blurs the line between dream and reality, centering on questions, of course, of self-identity and the struggle to break free from forces that dictate one's life. I've seen a lot of different interpretations into what people get out of this film and its core message. The disturbing factor mostly comes from the graphic scenes, but also from the final reveal, which once sinks in, carries an unsettling message about being forced into submission within society. It's a fever dream of a film with a killer opening. Okay, I might be cheating a little bit here because the next one is an episode of a series, but it is a standalone, and it is a must-watch for any fan of disturbing Japanese cinema. But it is also the only one on this iceberg that is in English, but it is directed by a Japanese director, filmed in Japan, and has almost a full cast and crew that is Japanese. I'm talking about Imprint. This is the infamous Masters of Horror episode directed by Miike Takashi. This episode was banned from airing on Showtime because of its extreme content. It follows a 19th century American journalist searching for his lost lover in Japan. Here he meets a disfigured woman who recounts multiple, increasingly horrific versions of his missing lover's fate, involving torture, betrayal, and murder. The episode definitely matches the overdramatics of the rest of the show, but it does have some wild themes, including trafficking. It's truly dark and disturbing, and the visuals are very theatrical, but it's a short and punchy ride. This next film is truly my favorite Su1c1de film, and I'm exposing myself a little bit here because it's Strange Circus. It's very high on the disturbing scale. It's a very sick and twisted movie, so be nice or don't, I don't know. I'm just exposing myself here, so big warning. I believe this is his most unsettling work. It dives headfirst into the cycles of trauma, abuse, and psychological torment without flinching, and there is some insane gore near the climax. It starts with a story of a destructive mother-daughter relationship, seen through the distorted eyes of a child raised in an environment of sexual abuse. Early on, her father locks her inside a cello case with a peephole, forcing her to watch her parents, and that is just the beginning. The circus then becomes a metaphor for an imagined spectacle that helps her process process and survive her trauma. But it's not too long until the film reveals itself to be a story from an author, which blurs the line between sick reality and twisted fiction. As it goes deeper, it pulls the audience into a psychological maze of identity, trauma, and self-hatred. Did this really happen? Who was our mysterious lead? And what about their childhood is real? Strange Circus doesn't just hint at taboos, it confronts them head on, with imagery that will burn into you, and a final act that will leave your head spinning just when you think it can't get any worse. It touches on everything, every single taboo theme we have spoken about thus far, and it wraps it in haunted circus sequences, bold editing, and a chilling score. But my favorite part of this film is its twists and shocking reveals. It really does keep you guessing, but its finale is so brutal. It's one of the most graphic scenes I've ever seen in a movie. It is relentless, but if you can handle the themes, it is a disturbing journey you will never forget. The World of Kanako is one of the most chaotic Japanese thrillers I've witnessed. It's an oversensory nightmare at points. The film forces the viewers into a chaotic, violent, and stylistically overwhelming world. Based on the novel Endless Thirst, the story is about a man navigating a dark, unsettling underbelly of society while searching for his estranged daughter. He encounters corruption, trauma, and human depravity along the way, but he is not a good man, so there are no real great characters here. With a fragmented timeline and a relentlessly intense tone, the film blends drama, noir, and psychological horror into a disturbing exploration of violence, exploitation, and broken human connection. The dark themes in this one include child exploitation, abuse, trafficking, and extreme family dysfunction. There's also some very taboo sexual themes throughout this movie that highlight the results of abuse and neglect, and it's all smashed together to create a cold and brutal world that really challenges its viewer. Next up, a Japanese film about a love hotel. Su1c1de is back. No surprise, the movie opens with the lead detective in the middle of adult activities, only to be called to a crime scene at a love hotel that is crawling with maggots. This film, Guilty of Romance, then splits into chapters. The main story follows a woman who has lost her self-identity due to the dynamics with her domineering husband. But things change when she is lured and groomed into creating adult films and eventually doing sex work. Although what begins as manipulation slowly transforms into how she sees herself. Meanwhile, a murder investigation grows gorier and the two narratives inch closer together. The film digs into shame, guilt, and how sexuality is exploited and used as currency. It's messy and unhinged, but full of disturbing crime and graphic adult scenes. And it's constantly making you guess how these stories are connected. How is this woman's downfall connected to these crimes? The payoff is intriguing, but it's not exactly poetic. Maybe because it's framed through a male perspective. The standout, though, is Megumi Karuazaka, who is actually the director's wife. She plays the lead. Her range in this film is insane. The intensity, the raw vulnerability that she gives to the role, it really makes it worth watching because it is disturbingly real. I can't imagine the trust that she must have with him to play this role. Guilty of Romance is a very unsettling thriller crime that definitely pushes a lot of disturbing boundaries. Marebito, directed by Shimizu Takashi, follows the downfall of a freelance cameraman who becomes obsessed with capturing the essence of fear on film. His search takes him into the hidden underworld beneath Tokyo City, where he encounters strange, inhuman beings in unsettling visions that blur the line between reality and madness. The Iron Man himself, Shinya Tsukamoto, plays our cameraman, and I love how he always gravitates back towards disturbing, boundary-pushing horror. At first, the film feels like a study of psychological decline, but as this unfolds, it becomes clear that our lead might be more sinister than we initially expected. But it's not even what happens down there, it's what he brings home from the underground, which ends up being the most disturbing part of this movie. It leads to a lot of deeply uncomfortable sexual perversion and some really dark imagery. The film draws heavily from Lovecraftian horror, weaving in themes of obsession and, of course, the subconscious. But beneath all of the symbolism and metaphors, it's a gritty, grimy, bizarre experience. One that makes me feel like I've been put on some kind of watch list if I wasn't already on it. I definitely recommend this one if you're into freaky, unsettling, unapologetically strange horror movies. Welcome to tier 5 of this Japanese disturbing iceberg. Kite is a staple of Japanese disturbing cinema, but I'm warning you, as predictable as this tale of revenge is, it has very intense, brutal scenes of underage abuse. The thriller anime was originally a miniseries, but has since been edited into a movie format, although it's still banned in Norway. It follows a vigilante orphan who has been trained to take out corrupt members of society, especially those with extreme power. The opening scene is amazing, but she does all of this under the guise of her mentor, who she begins to question. There's a few different copies of this film, and the uncut version is under an hour long. It's still very action-packed and gory, but even with this condensed version that has a lot of the sexual content cut out, it has some extremely upsetting moments involving scenes of grooming and assault. I have to tell you guys, I watched the uncut version, that's what I had my hands on, and that was enough for me. This film is an underground cult classic. It's also rumored that Tarantino was inspired by this film for his character of Gogo in Kill Bill, but it was also made into a live action flop that starred Samuel L. Jackson. Give the original a watch if you're interested in really disturbing action-packed anime. I enjoyed it, but I will say it is a lot with the underage moments. A Snake of June is a highly erotic thriller. I'm warning you on this one. And this one is not only starring our Iron Man again, but he is the director. It's a film that is visually stunning, but it's emotionally brutal because it's themed around a voyeuristic photographer, which kind of works well with the theme. It's shot in stark black and white with a blue washed filter and driven by a menacing, repetitive score. It tells the story of a happily married woman who works as a mental health counselor, but her life spirals when a stranger begins stalking her, sending her copies of humiliating sexual photographs of herself, using them for blackmail. Now completely under his control, she's forced to obey his increasingly degrading demands. But what makes this film especially unsettling is how the blackmail is framed as twisted exploration of desire. The perpetrator is a photographer, and as I mentioned, the film mirrors its contrast, textures, and stylized compositions that feel more like living photographs. It's as much of an art piece as it is a disturbing sexual thriller, but it is very, of course, voyeuristic. But there is a letdown in this film because although the lead character, her story is emotional and really well told, it is told in chapters and it's not consistent throughout once we shift from her focus. The fact that the film is stylized kind of like a Peeping Tom movie, keeping the perpetrator in the dark, I think is its stronger points. So when they switch out of this perspective, it loses tension. It's a great concept that can't really get it together in the end, and it turns into a violent, bizarre art house, pushing it to the extreme. It's not an easy watch, but A Snake of June is really fascinating. It's uncomfortable, beautifully shot, and perhaps exploiting its own disturbing theme, which is interesting in itself. A Page of Madness is next, and this one does stand apart from the others on this list, not just for its experimental style, but for its remarkable history. The film was considered lost for 45 years until the director stumbled across a surviving print at his own storage shed. The film abandons traditional storytelling in favor for pure visuals, rapid editing, and an intense atmosphere, plunging viewers straight into the chaos of a mental asylum. When it first screened, Japanese audiences would have experienced it with a live narrator explaining the story, but without this guide today, it feels kind of like a fever dream. At times, a little bit reminiscent of Begotten. But that's what makes it so unsettling. It's distorted faces, frantic dancing, and claustrophobic shots. The loose story, which I can garner without narration, follows a janitor who takes a job at an asylum to care for his wife who is a patient but no longer recognizes him. But he's haunted over the guilt of the tragedy that led to her decline. The narrative comes in fragments, half fantasies, and flickers of memory, which makes it challenging to watch, and I would have loved to see it with the live narration. Still, without words, the emotional torment comes through pretty strong, and although the film doesn't push boundaries very far, it's from the 1920s, so the subject matter was pretty edgy. It was very much ahead of its time, and the way it depicts the life inside the facility. This next one's English title is The Sinners of Hell, and it's a poetic yet nightmarish journey that begins, like most of these films, with a deceptively simple crime. There's a hit-and-run accident that entangles a student and his unsettling companion, and what starts as a human drama of guilt and then betrayal, and then revenge, slowly turns into something far darker, but we only get into this in the final act. The movie acts as a moral compass where a string of accidents result in our lead facing serious consequences in hell. I love the way that the film was shot in the first 2 acts, but even though it does really descend into the masterpiece of hell, the movie before this still kind of frames its existence as being in limbo, mainly because of its beautiful cinematography, which really lights up the subject matter and leaves them kind of floating in this darkness. The movie has a lot of characters and it establishes a complicated setup so that we can see the results on the other side. What happens to these people when they finally meet their maker? And the result is quite jarring. I honestly didn't think that they would push it this far. The beautiful drama turns into a gory nightmare where we watch people be filleted, boiled, torn apart in theatrical displays of violence that are incredibly shocking and graphic for the 60s. With its surreal mix of psychological torment, grotesque imagery, and even taboo revelations, which I'll leave you to discover, the film shifts from a slow, almost vanilla opening into a haunting depiction of damnation. I think it's well worth a watch because of its practical and theatrical elements. It's a wild ride, not entirely groundbreaking within its subject matter. You know, bad choice have bad consequence, but it does have its shocking moments. Su1c1de is a tense, claustrophobic psychological thriller that takes place over one night. It's about 2 aspiring actresses who audition for the same part in an upcoming film. The film is, of course, called Yakuza Wives. Now they wait for the result, but their passive-aggressive rivalry begins to spiral out of control. Confined to the apartment, the movie moves from psychological conflict into a physical battleground. The movie was filmed in just 8 days, and it's short and sharp with its intention in its minimalistic setting. I would say that the film's dark edge and disturbing nature is its violence, but it's not a movie that dwells on for too long. As I said, short and sharp. Gemini is another film that is directed by Shinya Tsukamoto, and this is based on a Dokuwa Rampo story. It's a mix of folklore, ghost tale, and psychological nightmare twisted up in a family drama. It follows a respected doctor living a somewhat successful life with his beautiful wife, but his wife suffers from amnesia, and her past is conveniently unknown. But when his parents suddenly pass away, a mysterious figure appears in his life, and now his world begins to unravel, leading to dark, twisted supernatural revelation. And what follows is a tale of identity theft, violence, and obsession. For me, this one felt like a cruel fairy tale. It's so unnerving in its atmosphere. It has this eerie repetition of sound. I wouldn't even say it's a song. It's just the sound, like a Gregorian chant that keeps playing in the background. And it has this beautiful theatrical makeup. I love what they did with the eyebrows. The film is also very physical with its darkness, and it's highlighted by rich costumes in a freaky atmosphere. It's so strange and unnerving. It's a beautiful, claustrophobic, haunted freak show, and a great film for people who are looking for disturbing J-horror that feels like a cursed fairy tale, just to be, very specific. The Forest of Love is a twisted story of love and betrayal that plays out over a hefty 2.5-hour runtime. This one is another one directed by Sono. Again, he just keeps popping up. The film from 2019 is the story of 2 girls who meet again later in life after having experienced an unbreakable, traumatic bond in school. Now working with an odd gang of inspiring filmmakers, they attempt to right a wrong and expose a dangerous man who is taking advantage of young girls. Even with its long runtime, this film is anything but slow or straightforward. Its disturbing themes include murder, torture, and there's some really intense scenes of self-harm. And it's all wrapped up in a Romeo and Juliet theme. Well, kinda. It has a campy delivery, which I find some of these disturbing films adopt, and sometimes it makes the disturbing elements more eerie because of the light-hearted tone or passive reactions to a deeply traumatic element. But as the film progresses, it loses its quirky nature and becomes extremely dark. The film is a real roller coaster, and it's anything but boring. The film is actually inspired by a real serial murder incident that happened in Japan between 1996 and 1998. And the original title, Scream in the Forest Without Love, was probably a little bit more suitable. I found this film to be a brutal watch, not just because of its violence and the villain's manipulation, but because of the sheer hopelessness of watching these kids being trapped in cycles of torture, self-harm, and control. It leaves you feeling as powerless as they are. But what I like about it is it touches on the exploitation of real disturbing movies because of the whole film camera crew that are there. They are recording these scenes and events that cross the line. It also has a really killer, twisted ending, which does work in coming full circle. Its weird, eerie tone paired with violence and grooming is extremely unsettling. This is not the first time, or probably the last, I'll speak about Kotoko. And this one was directed by Shinya Tsukamoto and written by J-pop artist Coco, who plays the lead. It's a raw and haunted Japanese drama about a single mother battling her inner demons while trying to hold her life together. It blends really intimate scenes of mental illness, love, and violence. The film has been referred to as messy and jarring, but personally, I find that these qualities echo her downfall and mental state. But it's sold by Coco's emotionally devastating performance. You can obviously tell how close this project is to her heart, and her vulnerability is truly heart-wrenching. I would put this one down as one of the most honest films I've ever seen on the subject matter. It's a film that doesn't flinch or look away from the darkest parts of humanity, but also the parts that touch a lot of people's lives. Make no mistake, while this one is rooted in psychological disturbance, it also unleashes visceral violence, with scenes portrayed in brutal, graphic detail. I do urge you to be in the right headspace when you're watching this film, although if you're watching this list, perhaps you never were. But this is what it's all about: beautiful, heartbreaking cinema that isn't afraid to cross the line and talk about things that we don't usually get to talk about. Tier 6, we're almost there. How many films have you seen so far? I would love to know. By the way, there's 54 in the entire Iceberg. The more I watch dark Japanese cinema, the more films I see that have a fixation with memories and dreams, always revealing the true horror beneath. Tomie is based on Into Junji's manga of the same name. The movie was the first at what would become a long-running film series. Instead of focusing on gore, it leans heavily on atmosphere and crime scene reveals that leave the violence to the imagination. But you know, there's the typical distorted faces and a hypnotic soundtrack. The story is about a young woman with amnesia trying to recover her memories with the help from a psychiatrist. But while her memories might help an ongoing investigation, they also uncover a deeper, violent truth. The movie feels campy at times, and it is more horror focused, going for scares instead of shocking, but its violence and psychological abuse tends to make it more disturbing than other straight up horrors. It does feel a little bit unsatisfying with the big setup, but its mix of ominous tone, surrealist imagery, and dreamlike unease makes it a little creepy, quirky film that holds space as a cult oddity, and one that went on to spawn countless sequels and spin-offs. Freeze Me is a heart-pounding, disturbing thriller, but it can also be put into the assault revenge category. The movie is about Chihiro, who is in a relationship with her colleague and enjoying a happy life, but suddenly she is visited by a man from her hometown who abused her along with other men. They also recorded the event, which unfortunately you do see a lot of. In the present, this man barges back into her life, leading her to turn to her new partner for protection, but she soon learns that she must take matters into her own hands. The lead carries this film and the tension is undeniable. The name is quite clever with the reoccurring theme of ice and snow, something that reminds her of her trauma, but that she uses in a poetic manner. It's honestly one of the better of this sub-genre, you know, the revenge films. It's a violent story and it is infuriating to watch her helplessly ask everyone for help as they do nothing. And I wouldn't say I really liked the end scene, especially the last minute, but if you can suspend your disbelief, get ready for a dark, thrilling ride of revenge served very cold. Violent Angels is an experimental violent drama from 1967. It's a very simple plot. A man breaks into a house which is shared by nurses who refer to themselves as White Angels. Here he begins to torment them violently and sexually. The movie is said to be based on the 1966 spree of Richard Speck, a man who ended the lives of 8 nursing students. And if so, it's understandably pretty controversial due to the real victims being portrayed in such a graphic sense. Without this background, the film's use of nudity appears animalistic, but not in the way you would think. It likens the women to a pack protecting each other, while in the violator's mind they become a group mocking him. This is the first film in this Iceberg to touch on the incel theme, but we're going to see more as we go down. What stood out to me was the reveal of this animalistic nature, not from the man, but from the women, backed into a corner doing anything for survival of their group, including sacrifice. I'm not too sure about the ending, but going in, knowing the plot line, which I read before watching this movie, I wasn't expecting it to be such a reflective experience with a lot of experimental shots and editing, but maybe I've been watching for too long. A little bit desensitized at this point. Angel Dust is a psychological crime horror that focuses on dreams and hypnosis, yes, again, but this one takes inspiration from Silence of the Lambs Crimes format. Actually, you know what? Longlegs isn't too far off either, in a very strange way. It follows a forensic psychiatrist who is working with the police to help solve a series of murders. These ones are targeting the Tokyo underground. But the answer is closer than she thinks, and what starts as a crime thriller serial killer hunt warps into a study of paranoia, control, and 90s erratic jarring editing. It also has a killer industrial soundtrack, paired with beautiful surrealist cinematography. It creates a mood that is hypnotic and disorientating. The movie gets a little bit complicated the deeper the mystery goes, but it's well worth it for the 90s crime thriller gritty atmosphere. I'd say the disturbing elements in this film are quite constrained compared to some of the others on this list, but it does have some shocking moments which I don't know are justified. I feel like at times it's a little bit scared to dive fully into its theme, but it's a good watch for those looking for a psychological thrill with a lot of shocking reveals. Liverleaf is a Japanese horror drama adapted from the manga series Misu Miso. The film has themes of bullying, trauma, and psychological collapse. It follows a young girl who is tormented in school, while authority figures remain powerless or really indifferent. But the story escalates into extreme violence, exploring the dark extremes of grief, revenge, and cruelty, often blurring the line between the victim and aggressor. The film's brutality is striking because its violence is shown in really slow, drawn out, unflinching scenes. And there's both practical and stylized CGI effects, creating this graphic kind of like comic book aesthetic. Beyond the gore though, the film is just stunning. It has these wide, beautiful landscape shots, contrasting the human fluid with the beautiful snow. It's a disturbing schoolyard horror, which becomes the study of vengeance and grief, and of course the human capacity for cruelty. This next film, Caterpillar, is a movie I will never forget. It is one of the most memorable for me on this list. It follows a wife who is dealing with the personal after effects of war when her husband returns home limbless with a brain injury. They are given medals to honor the family, but they only highlight what they truly sacrificed. This film is raw and brutal and has very strong anti-war messaging. It also includes photos of real-life atrocities before and after the events of the film. But the personal story drives into heavy spousal abuse and trauma from the war. The graphic scenes in this film are so hard to sit through. Honestly, when I started watching this film, I had no idea that it would be centered around sex. It seems, although it was a thought out intention with the idea of how this couple connects post-accident, it crosses a lot of lines because the resentment grows between them and there's a lack of ability to consent, which is echoed throughout war crimes. This is a disturbing film with a strong message, and while its theme stands out from others on this list, I can't say the betrayal of the husband ever feels quite right. It's a strange, unsettling watch, and one that belongs on this kind of iceberg. I think I scarred myself a little bit with this one. Serpent's Path begins with a setup that is both concerning and immediately gripping. Two men kidnap and chain a man in an abandoned warehouse, accusing him of a horrendous crime against one of their daughters. But what starts as a straightforward revenge scenario quickly spirals into something much deeper and much more complex, as they uncover that the crime is only the tip of a much deeper, bloodier rabbit hole. This film is brutal. It's filled with torture, both psychological and physical. And while its crimes against children are already harrowing to watch, it's often the unshown which lingers the most. The tone for this one is grim, which makes the bursts of violence feel that much more raw and unsettling. The film was later remade in 2014, relocating the story to France. This original version is known for its more stripped back style. I have to warn you though, while the mystery itself is gripping, its revelations can feel confusing if you approach it from a straightforward crime thriller perspective. At its core, Serpent's Path is less about a plot and it's more about a philosophy. It's the exploration of revenge, cruelty, and evil cloaked in the guise of a violent crime story. It's dirty, violent, and bleak, and its torture scenes are a lot, but that's what makes this film so effective. And although it seems grounded in reality for a large portion of it, do not take this too seriously because otherwise the ending of the film will leave you quite unsatisfied. Do not take it literally. Hanging Garden, adapted from a novel, is an unsettling drama about a family who live by the rule of total honesty. No secrets, no matter how taboo. Yet this drives them to live in a suffocating environment. We watch as the mother tries to hold together the image of a perfect family, controlling everyone, including possessing the only key to the apartment. While her husband drifts between affairs, their children spiral into apathy and rebellion. It's also set in a half-finished suburban complex that feels like a sci-fi experiment with shopping malls and a Ferris wheel, which is quite important, and of course love hotels. And this is stranded on a farmland. It's also intensely metaphorical, as they're living in this artificial quote-unquote openness. And there's also the blatant metaphor of the film being called Hanging Garden, which is an idea on the gardens of Babylon, a gift to help forget where you are. It's the same as hiding behind a white picket fence. It's just an illusion. And the film has circling sections of cinematography that feels reminiscent of Irreversible. We have circles repeated throughout, including the Ferris wheel. There's dinner table scenes, a rotating bed at the Love Hotel. It's all emphasizing this endless loop of confession and denial. It's more of an uncomfortable premise, as they're very open with each other about their transgressions, and it's extremely layered, demanding multiple viewings to fully understand the details. But overall, it suggests that sometimes honesty is just another performance. It's lighter in terms of graphic content, but it's more darker and disturbing psychologically and philosophically. I promise I'll never say that sentence again. Under Your Bed is a creepy little Japanese film, not to be confused with the 2023 Korean remake. The film follows a lonely boy who was ignored at school until one girl showed him kindness. Now, years later, he is still obsessed with her, and he finds her later in life, only to see how much she's changed. But his obsession drives him to break into her house and hide literally under her bed, hence the name. We are crossing some deeply unsettling ethical boundaries here, but that's not where it stops. That's just the start. The story takes a darker turn when we realize that she is trapped in an abusive marriage. Suddenly, the film becomes more than just stalking. It's about blurring the line between invasive obsession and twisted protection. The movie forces the viewers to confront many issues through the concerned stalker's eyes, ones they might otherwise avoid. What makes this film so disturbing is how it frames stalking as sympathetic or even justified, complicating our moral reaction. This is a tense, messy, challenging drama that keeps you torn between horror and heartbreak. It's a strange experiment that is well worth the moral dilemma, although it does deal with disturbing scenes of violence and presents it almost in a soapy, romantic drama. And here it is, guys, the film that echoes a lot of the same themes from Grave of Fireflies, but it is presented in a different manner. This is Shadow of Fire, and it is utterly devastating. This film is about the effects of war, psychological scars, and the human connection. Set in a small burnt-out tavern, the film follows a woman who is forced to sell her body to survive, but she's not alone. Her young son is also with her. But the interesting thing about this movie is how it transfers. I assumed it would show the innocence of the child in this situation, but instead it's the opposite. He is not naive to the situation. It's part of what makes it disturbing, knowing how his life has been normalized in this way. The people of his town are cold and violent towards him. But the film transfers in a few different ways. We get different characters' backstories touching on soldiers' realities and psychological scars. It does a great job at exposing the unbearable weight of war, hunger, fear, and violence without taking pause. It also transfers throughout the small village, showing how this torment lives side by side in everybody. Everyone has these nightmares, no matter how young you are or how old. There's some really intense mental health crisis moments that I found utterly terrifying, but it's handled with such delicate care. It's a stark reminder of the long-lasting, horrific consequences of war on individuals. This movie is a must-watch. I found this to be fantastic. And this Iceberg is, again, ordered by popularity, so I cannot believe it's not higher up. Do yourself a favor, add this one to your to-watch list. What a change in tone. Face is a strange little gem of a film. It's equal parts crime, comedy, and drama, and it balances this all together in a quirky, eccentric story full of some dark undercurrents. At the center, it's about a withdrawn older sister who keeps to herself, working hard in her mother's dry cleaning shop, but she's constantly overshadowed and belittled by her flashy younger sister. But when their mother dies, the older sister finally snaps, and what follows is a peculiar journey with this older, meek sister going out into the big bad world. Here she takes on new identities, odd jobs, and despite suffering repeated abuse, she slowly begins to bloom into someone resembling her sister. The film is unsettling in the way it frames the older sister as both the victim and perpetrator. She's sympathetic and absurd. Its bizarre nature is highlighted by the quirky whistling soundtrack and offbeat tone, which makes moments of assault and even self-harm all the that more uncomfortable. And to add to all of this, it's shot beautifully with striking angles and a distinct aesthetic. Face is rarely discussed, but it deserves more attention as an example of cinema that dares to push us into uneasy territory, asking us to empathize with its flawed protagonist. This one is truly for the weirdos. I, the Executioner, opens up with a brutal scene of a man abusing and ending a woman's life. But hold on, because this is not exploitation as it first seems. In fact, nothing is as it seems, as this man is here for vengeance. At its core, this movie is a noir crime thriller about a man hunting down a group of women who share a dark secret. Although, this is the kicker, they have never met him. The movie acts as a murder mystery about this mysterious man's identity and why he's committing these crimes. But we do this through the police investigation and his own perspective, meeting in the middle to a heartbreaking revelation. While the opening promises relentless violence, the bulk of the film plays out more like a drama, building tension through its mystery. Still, the murders are graphic, with imagery that lingers. But what makes this film so effective is the gradual reveal of the truth, and I promise, once you've seen this film, you won't be able to put it back. You can't put the truth back into a box, and they do show you mostly everything. It's a very beautiful, dark movie that knows how to hold its cards tight to its chest, but it isn't afraid to twist the dagger in revealing sinister graphic moments. And because of its reveal, you're unlikely to forget this one, even if you try. If you've made it this far, you are a champ, because we're at tier 7, the lowest part of this iceberg. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I do want to give a huge shout out to my patrons who support me over there, make videos like this possible, make it possible for me to spend time making myself go insane watching these. But also, I would love if you got in on a little joke with me in the comments and talked about Dr. Piggy. Ask me why I haven't spoken about Dr. Piggy, the Japanese film, describe it to me, or just get really angry that I refuse to watch it. We'll confuse other people in the comments, and I always get a kick out of watching all of you making creative responses from that. I promise there'll be people in the comments already who have no idea what you're talking about. Anyway, enough of that palate cleanser, let's get back into it. And this next one is a very beautiful but dark story. Backwater is a really sober movie about the cycle of abuse. It's told through the perspective of a 17-year-old boy who witnesses the sexual and violent abuse of his father, who inflicts this on the women in his small town. The film has a narration throwing throughout, highlighting the normalization of these dark parts of his life. And in this coming-of-age format, he begins to show the same signs of his father when facing his own awakening. Although this film has its moments, it's a slower film that's concentrated on the relationship dynamic and self-reflection. The movie also has a very strong metaphor with the water. This town has a polluted river that runs through it, and some of the scenes talk about eating from this river and how it can be toxic, but it's still consumed by some and blindly given to others. You know, that toxicity that you're happy to literally dish out. It's a really confronting film that doesn't show everything, but instead focuses on the emotional impact. I would recommend it to anyone who prefers dramatic, disturbing movies that have a lot to say without being too graphic, but the end was really gut-wrenching. Village of Doom is a really dark journey into a loner's mind. Here we follow a man who was dubbed the smartest man in the village, who was left behind during war because of his health condition. Now, as one of the only men left in the village, he's met with women who long for their husband and turn to him for sexual gratification. But when his true health diagnosis is revealed, his popularity changes, and he does not cope with this well. He begins plotting revenge. He's also involved with his cousin in a romantic sense, which adds an extra layer of taboo to the film. It's really interesting to see a film about an oddball during this time of war. This is another incel-themed movie, and I did not expect that at all from the first act. It has a very violent conclusion, and I should tell you now, it's based on a real infamous crime, which is known to be one of the most deadly by an individual in Japanese history. But although he shared the same health condition as the real-life case, the true-life man was a nightcrawler, and in this film, the lead has a very different explanation and motive to his crimes, but it is a very dark movie. We are so far down on this iceberg, and here's where things get a little dicey, even if it's not splatter. This movie, I started watching it and it almost didn't make the cut because It starts with a brutal scene. It's a naked scene, an action scene of a woman being tortured, and it's shown through a very voyeuristic lens, but there is a reason for it, and I'm glad I pushed through because the movie has a very interesting and unique concept. It's an Inception-style story where we follow an actress who's pitching a story about an actress that seems too close to her own life, playing roles within the concept as we go, blurring the line between performance and reality. The execution leans towards lowbrow soap opera mixed with erotica and action, making it tricky to pin down, but oddly compelling. The main story is about a popular actress who is married to another actor who becomes suspicious about her husband's fidelity. So every night she wanders the city disguised as a sex worker, trying to cope with her sense of being unseen and unheard. But this soon spirals into violence. It reminds me a little bit of Strange Circus with its story inside a story structure, although with this one, the back and forth narrative does drag a little bit and feels repetitive at times. Still, the final half hour of the story is a strong payoff. While the whole ride could have been a little bit more punchy, I found the mix of melodrama, eroticism, and fractured reality to be surprisingly and disturbingly effective. Warning, lots of sexual content here, and it does get a little bit bloody too at the end. Which leads us to our final film, and I can tell you, this one is up against the boundary of splatter. I don't know if I should have included this one, but it makes sense to have a pretty intense movie as our last. And it was insanely hard to track down, but once I had heard about it, I had to. I was determined. It's a found footage mockumentary style J-horror. I don't know if you'd call this horror, but it opens with a man doing push-ups and casually talking about the alarming amount of women that he has assaulted. One is disturbing enough, but he brags about 107. And he's on camera flexing before panning to a woman over in the corner. And this scene of him assaulting her goes on for 15 minutes. But then the perspective flips because he ends up sending this tape to a magazine, offering them an exclusive interview. Their response? They send a young female reporter and cameraman because she's experienced in covering sexual abuse. Although she raises valid concerns about her safety and involving the police, the editorial staff brush her off with, "Don't worry, it will be fine." Spoiler, you know this. It was not fine, but they set up the interview in a public space. What follows is a disturbing interaction where he openly describes one of the most vile acts I've ever heard, while the reporter calmly nods and takes notes. It feels surreal, and then what he asks them to do next is absolutely horrific. The film itself is deeply distressing, but there is no gore. It's a very lowbrow found footage film, but the concept alone is nightmarish. I honestly think it could have worked better as a short because it feels like it's a stretch to have this as a feature length. It's almost too much for the viewer to accept that there's no way out for this journalist and cameraman, although there's so many opportunities in the longer run time. Still, it pushes right up to the edge of shocking cinema without tipping into pure splatter. This is the line. This is the end of the road. Its English title is Hypervillain, and that says it all. Would not recommend. And that is the end of my Iceberg. Thank you so much if you watched all the way through. I cannot believe it. I'm so sorry I didn't talk about Dr. Piggy. I started this Iceberg so long ago, and honestly, if I wanted to, I could have worked on it for years, but I really wanted to get it out, so I limited myself to 50 films. 54 ended up making the cut, and I wanted to keep them non-splatter so that it was more focused on psychological and still violent, disturbing movies. All the taboo subjects that we've spoken about a lot this year on my channel. Of course, like all Icebergs, I couldn't include every film. I know you guys have left a bunch of recommendations down in the comments. I know that there's going to be comments saying this should be here and this should be here, and I totally get it. I'm just doing what I can, and this already took me so long, but I really wanted to get it out to you, and I wanted it to be original from my point of view. But please still leave your recommendations down below because I love reading them. I also wanted to touch on, I'm sure I get comments about the pronunciations of names and saying names which way round. I went through and chose pronunciations that I had seen in interviews, multiple interviews of names. And I know in Japan they switch surnames and first names. So I do want to apologize for not being consistent with that, but I wanted to do what I had seen other people do. I know I was not consistent, but I was trying to get the pronunciation down more than anything else. I can't thank you enough for being here, and I've used enough of your time up, so I'm going to let you guys go now. If you do like Icebergs, I have done other ones. Here are some if you want to check them out, and I'll talk to you all very soon. And don't forget to subscribe if you like disturbing movies. I talk about them all the time. You can't shut me up. Okay, I love you guys. I'll talk to you very soon. Stay safe and stay spooky. Bye, friends.